Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Roy's Tie-Dye Sci-Fi Corner. This is episode number 181, and I want to welcome our very special guest. He's a writer, a director, a producer, and an entrepreneur, as well as a production designer, and he is Mr. Jeffrey Morris. Jeffrey, welcome to the show.
Hi, good to be here. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely, Jeffrey. It's a pleasure to have you. And of course, I also want to welcome with me, as always, the one and only, my co-host, Mr. Ross Amico. Ross, thank you for being with us as well.
Thanks for having me, Roy.
Absolutely.
Again.
Jeffrey, it's great to have you back on. In fact, the last time that you were on the show was back in May of last year. So it's wonderful to have you, and a lot of exciting things that are developing. So very excited to talk about that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, I'm really enjoyed being here last time, and I feel like you guys get what I'm trying to do, which is fun, and to be able to talk about it and engage and reach an audience that is excited about this kind of content is very it's thrilling for me. I think it's great. So
no, that's awesome. So now, actually, Jeffrey, can you, before we get into what projects that you have going on, and specifically one that is actually is rolling out immediately as we're speaking, can you talk about a little bit about your background in regards to how you became to be where you are right now, and your involvement with science fiction and science, I should say?
Sure. It's been an interesting kind of convoluted road that got me here, but I would start off by saying I wanted to be an astronaut when I was a kid, like so many of us in our age group. I caught the tail end of the Apollo program. So I think I became aware of it like about Apollo 14 or so. So 14 through 17, I watched all those launches as a small child. My father, he was an aerospace engineer, and he got me thinking about a lot of this stuff. And we would watch the transmissions from the moon, and there was something about the fact that we could, you could go outside in your backyard. You could see the transmissions on TV. And go out in your backyard and look up and see the moon and know there were actually people up there. And there was something really exciting about that to me, and I very much wanted to grow up to become an astronaut, and something that it's funny because a lot of my friends from early childhood, they're all surprised I didn't become an astronaut, but there's a reason. There was something around the mid to late 1970s. I really had this sense that we weren't going to be going on the trajectory it seemed, the path it seemed to be at the time. Like I would go check out all these books from the library about space exploration and the NASA plans, and they'd have all this concept art of here's what it's going to look like when we have a moon base, and here's here's our space stations and space colonies and all this, and it seemed super exciting. But it sure didn't seem like we were moving that fast. And I remember when they rolled out the space shuttle, I was like, okay, that's cool. It looks cool and everything, but it only goes up a few hundred miles. What about this Mars thing? What are we doing? So sensing this, I was like, I think we're kind of stalling out here, and it felt like we weren't moving as fast. And I saw Star Wars like a bunch of kids our age at the time, and I had a different view of it. Star Wars for me made me interested in filmmaking. I saw it and I was like, okay, for 2 hours I believed I was in another world, and I was like, how did they do that? So I did everything I could to learn about the process of filmmaking, and I got the Art of Star Wars book and the design books and stuff. And I learned about like Ralph McQuarrie and Joe Johnston and all those kind of guys, right? And John Dykstra. These people, they'll started kind of becoming my heroes. They were my new heroes. Like whereas you had like the Neil Armstrongs these filmmakers became my new class of heroes. Designers like Sid Mead, and seeing all this, I realized I wanted to make movies, realistic sci-fi films about the world that I wanted to grow up to live in. So another thing that impacted me as a child, seeing like 2001: A Space Odyssey, for example, or as we're going to talk about Space 1999, there are aspects of those movies that felt like the future that I was excited to grow up to live in. So I wanted to learn how to make movies about the world that so I could bring these worlds to life that were in my imagination. And so, I went to college for film. I studied film, studied visual effects, taught myself how to design spaceships and, do production design type stuff. But along the way, I ended up directing music videos, commercials. That was in the 90s. I started my own production company. Um, Along the way, I kept having people, I've always studied a lot of science. I never stopped studying science from childhood. So um, when I had, there was some interest that started coming up from like our local science museum, or I started getting invited to speak at schools. And so I had so much sort of this hit with education. It was like finding ways to bring what I was doing with film and art and mixing it with science and then working with young people. It went over really well. And so then what eventually ended up happening is I started a nonprofit, and that nonprofit became a subcontractor to NASA. And so I got to actually go and meet all these science heroes I had and start working with NASA and JPL, and was involved with those. And so I worked with them off and on for about 10 years.
Wow.
Meanwhile, I was still developing intellectual properties and becoming better at screenwriting and doing that sort of thing. And I decided to, once I kind of finished my education and science track, I decided to go back to film and put it all back together. And then that's when I launched the company that I currently own. And that was around 2010. And so then basically, via some amazing investors that I have been working with for about a decade, we've been building this IP and producing projects and getting them off the ground. And that's the short version of what my career in life has been, to get here. So,
but you know what, though? That's really cool, though, if you think about it. And part of me using this phraseology, it's almost like the best of both worlds in the sense, and I'm using that in the sense that you had your heroes that you grew up with in regards to space exploration, and then you kind of shifted a little bit, not losing that focus, but also became interested in the filmmaking aspect of it. And then as time progressed, you combined the two, and you still enjoyed the science aspect of it,
Absolutely.
the reality of it, along with, I'll say, the science fiction aspects of it, or I'll say the space fantasy and the imagination. And even though that they were separate, but you kind of brought them together, and they kind of formed to go in the direction that you're going in. And I think that's pretty interesting.
Thank you. I mean, I think the one thing that I realized very early in my life was that there was kind of a difference between space fantasy and science fiction. Actually, I grew up reading a lot of Arthur C. Clarke and or Larry Niven. Those are some of my favorite authors. Ben Bova, people like that. And a lot of them told stories that took place in our solar system, or there were stories that took place in this sort. And they had this reality of physics in there, right? Whereas, Star Trek was really cool, but some of the things that we're talking about were either theoretical or actually just kind of they made it up within the rules of the world, right? And Star Wars really didn't have any science to it at all. It was truly a space fantasy in a lot of ways. It was it's like a space techno fantasy in a way, because you've got these robots and spaceships and stuff, but then you've got these fantasy elements that would that could sit alongside something like the Lord of the Rings in a way, right? So so it's like I knew I wanted to do science fiction, actual science fiction, meaning I want to adhere as much as possible to physics. I want to adhere as much as possible to the either projected technology or existing technology, those sorts of things, to tell stories. And I think there's no reason why you can't do a movie like Apollo 13, which is a docudrama. But imagine, I think like I was pitching movies in Hollywood in the 90s similar to The Martian, right? Okay. But the problem was they didn't get it. Everyone was like, okay, so you want to do one of my first stories was about that my writing partner Frederick Haugen and I came up with, was about a base on Mars, the first big colony on Mars. And we actually wrote this in the early 90s. And actually Ridley Scott even optioned it for a while to produce it and do something with it. It fell apart along with another production deal he had, but we got really close. The point was, in this story, we were trying to say living on Mars would be hard enough. There's enough stuff trying to kill you in terms of the actual environment. You don't need monsters, and you don't need space battles and villains like that. You could just and we would pitch this stuff around Hollywood, and would always be like, well, where are the monsters? Where are the I want to see some space battles. Where are the guns on this thing? I'm like, well, it's not. There are no guns on the lunar module. It's not. Right? And so
right.
so I think that it took years for it to catch up. But like movies like The Martian, they started to show that you could do these kinds of stories, and everything, keep the science reasonable realistic. So that's very much a big part of what I'm doing with the content I'm creating. So,
very cool.
Yeah.
It's a very cursory overview of your career, and I hope that we can talk a little more about that, in a bit.
Sure.
But the company that you founded now, is this it's FutureDude Entertainment, right?
Yeah. It initially that's so FutureDude's the DBA for it, but the actual, I founded it under Morris FutureWorks. That's the name of the actual company. But I had this blog called FutureDude that kind of followed me on my travels as I was building the company and developing things. And I was talking with people in Hollywood, people in science, people in arts, all those things, right? And the blog actually was doing pretty well. People were following it. I was talking to musicians like Thomas Dolby and interviewing them. This is just stuff I just did for fun. But the blog did well. And I thought, man, FutureDude. So you got like Bill Nye the Science Guy, and there's all these. I was like, how could I popularize science? And so I thought, I'm going to rename my company FutureDude around it, And actually, it's gone over really well. People think it's cool, so I'm like, all right, cool. I'll just we'll run with it, and everything. Because at the end of the day, the one thing I want to add is that for me, my career and life are much more about the future and science in general. It wasn't just space, because when I was a kid, I was actually interested in underwater stuff. Right, that was really, like Jacques Cousteau specials, and the idea. There was this cartoon. Actually, they made a parody of it years later, but there was a cartoon when I was little called Sea Lab 2020. I saw that, and I was like, "That is so cool! That the city underwater." I don't know if you guys ever saw that or not, but it was really cool.
I didn't. The title sounds familiar, but growing up, I was a huge Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea fan. That was something that I mean, Irwin Allen. It was something I really enjoyed watching, and I tended to enjoy more of the serious episodes, but unfortunately, as it progressed, it kind of went into a different direction.
That's Irwin Allen. That's they start serious, and then by the time you get there, there's tentacle monsters, and
yeah.
So, but anyway, my point is, I was interested in weather, I was interested in underwater, I was interested in all these things, but it was really the future, much more about humanity and building a better future than it was specifically being space. I mean, space is part of our future, but so that's why FutureDude works better. I think it's not just Space Dude, and it's much bigger than that. So yeah,
it's all encompassing. I want to welcome some of our viewers that are out there too, and I just want to give some shout outs to them. I see that John Haig, the Haig is out there. Welcome, John. He's joining us from Pennsylvania. Bill Scarrato is actually joining us, my friend from the Country Gate Theater, and he's in Harmony, New Jersey. Christian is joining us from Canada. Welcome, everyone. I see Sue is joining us. She's saying, hi, Jeffrey, and thank you for coming back to the show.
Happy to be here.
And also Deborah is joining us from Phillipsburg, New Jersey. Welcome, Deborah. Great to see you there. Martin is joining us from New York State. Nick McCarty is also out there.
Hey, Nick.
And Claudia Combs is joining, and she just said, my eagle just landed. Hi, everyone.
Cool.
And Warren is also joining us from Canada. Hey, Warren, good to see you there. Jeff Rubel's joining us from out west. I believe he's in Utah. And Lou is joining us from Rhode Island. Welcome, Lou. Good to see you there. And Sue's commenting saying, wow, that's incredible that Jeffrey was president about the delayed direction of NASA at the time. It's so sad that we didn't go to Mars early on, but amazing that he realized that. So she's.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it was, it's funny. It was actually a little bit of it was sad. I don't know how to explain it. There was almost a sadness I had, especially when I had all my friends and they're playing with these action figures and all this stuff, and they were super excited. And I was like, yeah, but guys, like there's this real thing. Check this out. And everyone's like, yeah, but but lightsabers, and I'm like, yeah, those are cool, but but we could really go to the moon, and we could really go to that kind of thing. So it was interesting. So yeah, it is nice to feel like it's coming back around now. That's what it feels like. We're on the other side of the cycle, and there's a future again. We'll get to that. We'll talk about that.
Yeah, and with that said, and I'm just going to say hello to a few other folks out there. Isn't it crazy though, Jeffrey, to think that it's like we're coming up on it's actually surpassed. It's 50 years. Ironically enough, I always felt it was special for me personally because my birthday is July 20th. And July 20th, 1969 was when the first, when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon.
Oh yeah.
And I always felt that personal connection with that. But It's
Absolutely.
crazy to think that 50 years has gone by since that actually took place, though.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dan Rodriguez is out there from Pennsylvania saying just listening to Jeffrey is amazing. So he
Thanks,
just wanted
Daniel.
to share.
Appreciate that. Yeah.
Dennis Chevalier is joining us. He's joining us from Canada as well. Welcome, Dennis. Good to see you out there. And just trying to make sure I'm caught up on everybody. All the shouts. Gary Boyer is out there. Hey, Gary. Good to see you out there. Thanks for joining tonight, too. And let's see. Nick is saying hello.
Yeah.
And Sherry, my wife, is out there, and she's saying, hi, Jeffrey. I wanted to be Jacques Cousteau when I grew up. I very much enjoyed that.
Yeah.
Steve Zissou.
Steve Zissou. Yeah. I was just thinking about that the other day. Yeah. The Life Aquatic. Oh yeah. So cool.
So, and also I want to say hi to Guy, who's joining us, and he's joining us from Washington, D.C.
Okay.
And that's Guy Carlson. Thanks for joining us, Guy.
Yep.
So with all that said, I mean, that was a perfect lead-in. You're saying that, we're starting to come, almost like, pardon the expression, full circle as we're coming. But in essence, it's very true. I mean, with the program and everything, the Apollo missions, and then the way everything progressed, and then we got away from it. But now, with everything that's happening within the world, and where you just sent up Endeavor and to journey, Artemis rather. Artemis to journey up close, passing the moon and coming back. I mean, that in itself was such an exciting adventure. And that's something that has not happened in so many years.
Oh, I know. It was amazing to see. It was wonderful. So it feels like, again, like, between that and that recent, slight, it's not full on breakthrough, but the breakthrough with nuclear fusion, that there's what I mean? There's some stuff coming here. We're starting to get to the other side of this potentially, which is exciting, because for me, it's felt like we've stagnated some, and I think our culture has, while we have more advanced technology in some ways, right? I don't know if the human being themselves has been progressing as much. And in some ways, when I look at it, I almost feel like we hit our peak from an intellectual standpoint almost, decades ago in some ways, and I'd like, and in a lot of ways, I think humans are at their best when they're being challenged. And that's part of what it is to go and travel places and experience these things, right? It pushes us to be our best, because we have to overcome challenges, and we need more of that. We're getting a little too comfortable, I think.
Well, interesting point too, because when you think back, I mean, and it's still when I think that, like, 1979, for example, I'm just going to throw that year out. It was literally 44 years ago. It doesn't seem real. And thinking back to like 1979 to 1980, and then you're thinking, what is the future going to be like 30? And then I'll even take it a step further, say 43 years later.
Yeah.
You would think there would be so much more advancement. We would be doing so much more.
No question. I mean, it's funny because I remember seeing Blade Runner in '82. Well, I didn't get to see it in '82 because I wasn't old enough, but I watched it on HBO later. But I got to see, when I saw Blade Runner and just seeing the flying cars and everything, like that vision of LA. I wouldn't want to live in that LA. Obviously, it's a horrible, place in terms of the pollution and the urban sprawl and everything, right? But there was something about the sort of retrofitted futuristic tech and the design and stuff, and these flying vehicles and all this sort of thing. It seemed completely plausible that 2019 could certainly have aspects of that film, right? I was certainly hoping that the world wouldn't be like it, like it was in the movie in 2019, but I was hoping the cool parts would be here, and everything. And it was really something to, it's funny because it was interesting. I saw this interview with Rick Berman, from the executive producer of Star Trek, Next Generation, others, and he, I used to complain to my friends sometimes because I love Next Generation, but I would say, like, man, it feels like when I watch that show, I'm watching a bunch of people from the 80s or 90s pretending to be 400 years in the future, in a way, because when they listen to music, they listen to music from now or music from the past, right? They don't really explore, like, what would music be like in the 24th century, right? It's like, here's Riker and he's playing his trombone and he's playing some, what I mean, right? And or their hairstyles were from the 80s or the 90s, right? And I kept feeling like, man, this doesn't feel like the future. It feels like people from now in in a projected future. And I read this interview with Berman, and he said, well, number one, we're doing that because we want the audience to relate to these people. If we came up with these really weird hairstyles and these really weird things, today's audience may not connect with them. And he said, but ultimately, myself, he said, I believe that the future is not going to be that different from right now. I think we're going to have like better technology and things like that, but actually people are just going to kind of act like they do now in that. Right. And I'm shocked because I think he's right. I think that's kind of what's happened. It's like, and I'm actually thinking about writing a book about this. I actually have this theory. I call it the perpetual now, where it's like when we got to the late 70s, right? Think about the 70s, technology got to a place where if you recorded music, think about this. When you listen to music, if you hear a song from like the 60s or the 50s or the 40s, the way it was recorded, you can kind of tell it was recorded back then.
Yep.
Right? Okay, you guys know what I mean? Right?
Oh, yeah.
If you listen to music, once you get to a certain point, which is about the mid 70s or so, the quality of recording started becoming very there was just a level to it. It all kind of, right? So now you could start to hear music that no matter when it was played, it sounds like it's contemporary. All right. I hope I don't sound crazy when I say this, but I have this theory that it's almost like these elements that started to come and fall into place in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s is almost like we started to kind of take it all for granted, and it became like I call this perpetual now. It's like I think there's young people right now who think that like it feels like we've always had microwave ovens. We've always had cell phones. Mm-hmm. We've always had Blu-ray players. We've always had, right? And it's, I think that's actually in a strange way, it kind of killed the future. And I don't know how to do, I don't know. It's just something to think about. It's just something I've been pondering,
No, but you know what though? And I'm going to jump in on your comment, but I haven't equated it to music, but I've equated it to film or actually television series, because if you look at, or even it could even be on a personal level. If you look at photographs from maybe like if I'm looking at photographs that were taken from my parents, or I'll even take it a step further. If they were from my grandparents' era, you can tell that it was from like the 1930s or the 40s or even the 50s. There's a quality about it. I mean, on the show, we've always said that every decade has its own tone to it. However, if you videotape something that took place maybe like 25 or 30 years ago, and you happened, now depending upon the quality, but I mean, back in the 80s, portable VHS players were very common. So a lot of, folks were using the recorder, especially in the 90s, maybe more so. If you're looking at that, it looks like it's contemporary. It does. It looks current. It looks very current. So
I was only using music as just one example, but I think it goes across the board in a lot of places where it just starts to, it just feels, there became this sort of, contemporary sort of line to everything, and I really think it's worth exploring. I really do. I think there's something that's happened with that. So imagine being a child born after that. Right. What's your view? Right. I mean, you compare it to our grandparents or great grandparents and the amount of progress and change they saw in their lifetimes. Right. I mean, it's hard to comprehend to go from the Wright brothers to landing on the moon and 64. I mean, it's you know what I mean? That's a big change. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's like it's getting narrower and narrower and
narrower. Yeah, it is. It's like the innovation and the change and the cultural change. It's I don't know. Anyway, so I digress.
Now we do that on the show. That's okay. No, and to your point though, too. I mean, think about our cell phones. I mean, you can watch a movie on your iPhone. I mean,
right. Oh yeah.
Before, I mean, you would have to wait for like if there was a television series that you hadn't seen and it had been played out, and it was you had to wait. For it to go into reruns, and you'd get that one shot to watch it again. And then if the show got canceled, hopefully that they would, rerun it in syndication.
I would tell my kids about how I would memorize the order of how shows would play out in syndication, so I could catch episodes I liked. Because we couldn't, it wasn't like there was a way to record them or anything like that, right? So I was like, oh man, I really like that episode, The Doomsday Machine. Okay, I know the order, so somewhere around this day they're going to show it again.
Yeah.
That way it's really weird, but I did that. It's like, because there was no other way. I remember memorizing themes to movies and TV shows because I liked them, because I didn't have access to a soundtrack or right now it's like literally, what like an episode of Andor comes out, and a couple days later it's like, well, oh, here's the soundtrack to that episode. Sometimes it's that day it comes out. Here's the soundtrack. There's a this instantaneous aspect to this. That it's definitely different. So yeah.
It really, really is. And Ross is he's a music lover. And I mean, if just looking behind him, I mean, all the CDs he has, I mean, that's his forte.
Sure.
So, I mean, Ross, in your opinion, which just to add to that.
Well, I had plenty of stuff to add along the way, but I don't know if I have anything relevant about the music or about.
Just about the different.
Well, I just some of the observations. I mean, there was a point where I said, movies really haven't changed since like 1980, but that was before the whole digital explosion. There was a period of about 20 years where movies didn't seem to change. Now they're edited much more quickly, and they have a lot of the computer effects and stuff. But I mean, if you watch The Empire Strikes Back, it's like it was just made.
Right.
For a long time it was like that.
That's the point, right? It's exactly. Yeah.
But and also about history shrinking, and because when we were born, it's like 50 years before. They were. I mean, we weren't that long after World War II. We were like within 50 years of women getting the vote. It's like crazy how short history is, because we get beyond that point. It's like now we're more than 50 years from when we were born. We're further away from when we were born than when we were born was from women getting the right to vote.
Yeah,
I mean, when you realize how short history is. It's
yes.
It's one of those weird things where it's like, oh, I could have shaken hands with Michelangelo if I had been born a few years earlier. And about humans being the same. And I think that's what makes a lot of science fiction work, and a lot of it's why we read old books and things and go back to the classics, because people don't really change. But it's even more so, as you say, as we get more into the present, and all this stuff is documented, and we can go and watch ourselves and listen to ourselves as we were.
And it's funny, because I'm not trying to say that we are exactly the same as we were, it's 10 years ago. I'm talking about like massive cultural shifts, right? The big, right? That's all I'm saying, is that we're kind of in this, when I talk about this concept of perpetual now, I'm talking about sort of like, there's like a parameter to it, right? That you're not seeing a shift like Wright brothers to landing on the moon. That's what I'm saying, right? Those sorts of shifts are not happening now, but who knows? There may be things coming that'll change that. So.
Yeah, things are a lot narrower now. I mean, that when you think about everything that took, and you were saying before, and you reflect upon it, where the turn of the century, going 1899 to 1900, people were not flying at that point. And then within that same century, not only were they flying, but going to the moon, going into space. I mean, it's really incredible, because it's a short period of time.
Think about light, like having lights, or electricity, or running water, or I think about going being at my grandparents' place, and they still had this was down in the South, and they had they'd added bathrooms and things into their house, but when they first bought their house, they had like an outhouse, right? Right. It's like, it's just such a different, it's just, and that was in their lifetime. And I was like, what is that? And then they would say, well, we used to go out there to go. I'm like, you did? It was such a big change, So anyway, let's move on to something else. We got
that's good. Yeah. I just want to also welcome a few other folks that are out there too. I see let me see here. Randy Lee joined us. Welcome, Randy. And he just commented. He said, "Movie I can watch a live broadcast now on the iPhone." My friend from work is joining us. Allie, welcome. She said, "So great. Welcome, Jeffrey."
Hi, Allie.
And she also said, "Soundtracks, great idea for a show." So, and then also, I'm seeing Chillenby, Washington is out there, and welcome to the show. Good to see you. Appreciate you being out there. Dan commented, "I think the ability of collaboration between artists from around the world due to the internet has changed how music and films are made, sometimes better, sometimes worse, because we don't get an individual vision of his or her craft."
Yes, I would agree with that. I would agree with that. Absolutely. And look, hey, I'm not saying that there isn't a future. I was just talking about sort of like how this sort of background feeling that I think has, right? But
tone, it's the tone.
Yeah, actually, but look at where we are right now. Look at what we're doing, right? I was just thinking about the fact that we're doing this, this live broadcast, and we're able to talk to each other in completely different parts of the country. That's amazing. That's wonderful, right? And I remember that's one thing when I go back to the early '90s. What my writing partner and I would talk about, man. Sometimes there would be bad snowstorms, and we'd be on the phone going, "Gosh, if there was just a way that we could like see each other right now, or talk to each other right now, or send files back and forth." I mean, you know what I mean? All that's changed, and that's wonderful. So I'm not. It's more about the cultural tone that I'm talking about. So, yeah.
Well, and just to add to that one point, Jeffrey, and then we'll move on. It was, video phones, I always thought would eventually catch on, and you would hear, obviously, Space 1999, the Comlock, that's a prime example. But I mean, even in other science fiction, I mean, you would have that ability to, not when you're communicating, not only by phone, but you would actually be able to see individuals. And it wasn't really until, I mean, the iPhone is an example where you're able to do that. Also now with Zoom, or we're using StreamYard for this platform, and we're able to do it. But that never caught on to the level that I thought it would. And I should say sooner than.
Well, I think the pandemic pushed us to it.
True. Yeah.
I think it was kind of there, but honestly, I even went through that myself. I was like, well, I don't want to. I'm like, I just got out of the shower. I don't want to be on camera. I was like, just talk to the phone, and everything. But the pandemic pushed us to this, and I've gotten used to it now, and it feels very normal to see people and to do this. And I think it's great. I think it's been a wonderful thing, and it's allowed us to connect with people and places and things that we may not normally have been able to in certain ways, and as a collaboration tool, it's been phenomenal, what we've been able to do. So it's great, so I do think, look, the last thing I want to say about it is no matter what, we're always living in someone's future, someone's sci-fi world, right? I mean, this, what we're doing right now is sci-fi to somebody at some point in the past, right?
Sure.
Driving a car was sci-fi to somebody at some point in the past, right? It's very fascinating when you look at it, like flying in an airplane or having plastics, you know what I mean? There's so many things that if you think about it, they in a science fiction context, imagine somebody 500 years ago imagining electricity or imagining, right? I mean, that's part of how science fiction has driven our culture forward, because that's where sort of the basis of like a lot of technological imagination germinates, so
definitely make a good story or a good book, I think.
Yeah.
Now, I do want to share, I want to get into talking about your current project that you're working on, and very excited to discuss this. And this is has to do with the Eagle has landed, and in regards to obviously the iconic spaceship from Space 1999. And just wanted to discuss that with you, and just how this all came about. I mean, obviously we know that you're a Space 1999 fan, a very large Space 1999 fan, but in regards to what drove you to actually come up with this project and head it in the direction that it's headed.
Well, okay. So I think it's really good that we kind of talked about the past and sort of my, how did I get to this place, right? And if I go back and I look at what a key element, Space 1999 was more important to me as a child than Star Trek was, simply because of the moon base and the Eagle, and the fact that the year was 1999, right? Star Trek took place in the 23rd century. I wasn't, barring some amazing technological advancement, not going to be around for that. Okay. 1999, I would look and go, oh my gosh, in the year 2000, my friends and I used to obsess, like, what's life going to be like in the year 2000? What are we going to do in the year 2000? I'm going to be 32 years old in the year 2000. We would talk about that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And Space 1999 to me, just like 2001: A Space Odyssey, it felt like there was a target there. There was something there to look forward to. There's something there that I could maybe be a part of. The idea of there being a moon base, there being something like that. To me, the Eagle, more than any other aspect of that show, epitomized that dream of the future. And when I always loved the design. It was a big deal for me growing up. I mean, I remember my mother, but my parents knew I liked it, and it was the year that when the Mattel, the big, Mattel, that version came out, and they had told some of my relatives that's what I wanted for Christmas. And I got really lucky because My parents bought me one for Christmas, and then my relatives came from Chicago and they had one for me, right? So I had two of those, right?
So you had Eagle 1 and you had Eagle 2.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would make up all these adventures, and I lived in Arizona, and I would and so what I would do is I would go in my closet and I would build an Eagle cockpit in my closet. I would take all the toys I had with buttons on them and things, and I would make control sticks and all kinds of stuff. And I so then I'd pretend I was flying the Eagle. Then I would leave. I'd go out of my bedroom out into my backyard, and I'd take my toy Eagle and I'd land it. And then I'd pretend I was walking around out in the desert and everything, like we were going to a planet. I totally did that as a child. I would do this with some of my friends. And we all thought the Eagle was really, really cool. And there was something about it. And I know, and as the years went on, I met other people who liked not only the show, but I started finding that more people were talking about the Eagle than they were talking about the show, at least in my travels, right? And part of that, I started going like, why? Like, why are we all, the people who are into this, why are we into it? Like, you've got this guy, this gentleman, Jan, in I believe he's in Denmark. And he's constructing like a quarter scale Eagle in his backyard, right? Like, there's all these different people who collect them and build them and talk about them and do visual effects of them. If you go on YouTube, there are hundreds of videos of people making their own little animations of this. And so I was like, there's something more to this. And I know for me, part of it was this. So I'm gonna bring up a little prop here, and you guys know what this is, right? This is the NASA lunar module, lunar excursion module. And I remember, there are people who describe this as being ugly. I never thought it was ugly. I thought it was one of the coolest things ever because it got us to the surface of the moon, right? And if you ever watch the series From the Earth to the Moon, there's an episode about the creation of this and how it all happened. It's really fascinating, right? And what they did to make this work, because they had issues with weight and materials and all the things to get two men to the surface of the moon. And this vehicle was a huge triumph of engineering to pull it off, especially in the amount of time. Once Kennedy said, we're going to do this, and it was like 9 years to do it, and they pulled it off, right? It was amazing. But there were certain aspects of the lunar module that, if I go in close, you see these attitude thrusters here, right? Okay. Now, when I was, and one of the things that was the difference between this and, say, let me find another example. Okay, we'll use the Viper from Battlestar Galactica, right? Okay, so this is a Viper, and it looks super cool. Love the design. I think it's great, right? The only issue with this is I'm not sure how you would change direction in space with this, right? Those thrusters are part of how this lunar module was able to move around. These little jets of nitrogen gas would fire out, and they would change course and change correction, course corrections and things like that. This thing looks really cool, but actually I'm not sure how it would really fly, right? Okay. When I looked at the Eagle, well, what do I see, like right here? My hand right there.
Yeah, you got the thrusters.
I see the same thrusters, same kind of thruster quad configuration on this that's on the lunar module. Okay. Now, when I was a kid seeing that, I was like, what does that mean? So what I put that together, and I said, well, if the LEM has that and the Eagle has that, that means the Eagle could actually probably fly to some degree, right? I mean, when I was a kid, I was like, I don't think they could take that in an atmosphere, but that's fine. I was like, but on the moon, right? In a lot of ways, the idea that, I saw elements of this that these engines and these elements, the superstructure, all these things felt like they were connected to what NASA was doing then at the time, or had done a few years earlier, right? So it felt like, to me, this was my future. It was a future that we were all heading toward. And maybe a real vehicle on the moon wouldn't look exactly like an Eagle, but man, it could be on the way to that real design, So what hit me was, this is exciting. And I felt like there are certainly, if not hundreds of thousands, if not into the millions of people who remember this show and love this thing. I was like, we should do a documentary about this. This is like an untapped topic. And I've never seen a documentary that focuses, people will do a documentary about a show or a movie, but I was like, I don't think I've ever seen one about like a spaceship, a fictional spaceship like this. you know, and the love of it and this obsession around it and everything. So you get people like me who've collected, you know, collect these, and I don't have anything with collection compared to some people, you know, that have these things, right? So it just felt, and you know, all the design work people have done, the blueprints of them, there's a lot that's happened. So I put together a team and a proposal, and I started shopping it around, and I found a company that I've actually always wanted to work with for quite a while. They're called 0.0 out of New York, and 0.0 does they worked with the TV series with Anthony Bourdain, the Parts Unknown that was on CNN. They produced that series, which I really loved. They do Somebody Feed Phil, which is on Netflix, which is a phenomenal program. My next guest needs no introduction with David Letterman. They do that, you know, so that these guys they're awesome. They've won, I think they've had like over 90 Emmy nominations and won numerous awards and everything. My point is, I sent this over to them. Two things happened. A couple of the producers there, one of the producers, she goes, "My brother had an eagle growing up, right?" And she was really excited. And one of her producing partners, who her sister, she was like, "I remember Space 1999. I loved that show. I thought it was great, you know." And we started talking about it. Then the other producer there, he says, "You know, guys, this is going to sound crazy, but I swim at my gym, my club, my athletic club. I was in the pool, and I'm between lanes. I'm stopping, and I'm there just, you know. And a couple days ago, this guy says, he swims up to me and goes, 'You ever see this show Space 1999?' Right? It just out of the blue, right? And they started having this conversation in the pool about it. Okay, so the point was 0.0. When they saw my proposal, they're like, 'Yeah, we're interested. We want to do this with you.' So we've been developing. We signed an agreement back in December to produce a documentary about this that we want to have ready by the 50th anniversary of the series. So
that's amazing. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
And for it to be bringing attention to the show, but more importantly, though, like you said, nothing like this has ever really been done before. And the eagle in itself is a major character of the show, and it is iconic. I mean, it's mostly, I probably, you know, putting aside some of the characters from the series, it is probably one of the most identified aspects of the series, and a conversation starter, you know, just as you gave examples of. And it has affected so many people on so many levels, and the respect that it's been given. This is just such an exciting project for you to be involved with. And I know it's going to be a wonderful time for fans of the series, fans of the show, and fans, of course, more so the eagle. And it's really going to give an awareness and really an in-depth look of how this all came about, how it all started. And you're going to really take everybody through on this journey, which is very exciting too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the key to me is I kind of broke it into 5 key sections, which is, you know, we look at, I want to shout out to Frederick, who developed the initial pitch with me, Frederick Haugen. He and I really looked at this, and we talked about, you know, part 1 was, you know, really looking at the 60s, right? And looking at the space program and how, you know, shows, you know, think about Space 1999 came along at a time that was like after Star Trek and before Star Wars, right, in a way. Right. So it kind of was in this really interesting zone, this sort of netherworld of sci-fi. And then you have these icons and characters and all these things that came out of it, really talking about that, but then also getting a chance to talk with, you know, Brian Johnson, the guy who, you know, did the visual effects and designed the vehicle and everything. And Brian, by the way, who's agreed to become part of this, he's going to work with us on it, which is great. But really being able to tell the story of how he came up with the design and what inspired him when he created it. And then also getting into looking at how you'd create the visual effects, how the visual effects were created at the time and that sort of thing. And I know we have some access to some never before seen footage that was actually behind the scenes stuff, but actually some visual effects shots that didn't end up in the show that no one's ever seen before. We've got some access to that. We found it was really cool. So stuff like that. But then I want to go forward from there and talk about collectors, and I want to talk about the whole collecting aspect of it and the toys that were made and that sort of thing at the time, and really talk about how where did we go from there? You know, like how did it endure for 50 years that people are still collecting this and building it, and you still have new models and toys, you know, coming out of this right now, 50 years later, right? And then you know, I want to talk about the future, right, of going back to the moon. And I'd like to actually, do some interviews with some of the Artemis astronauts who are going to be walking on the moon in the next few years, and look at what people like SpaceX are doing, stuff like that, and really circle back to this. We had this dream of being on the moon back then. Where does the dream stand today? And then the last section of this that I really want to get into is the idea, and Brian's really excited about this, is we want to do some visual effects shots of what it would look like if the Eagle was realized with today's visual effects. As Brian said to me the other day, it's like a digital 1999. Like, what would that look like? I'm going to push to do some miniature work with it as well. So, and we're hoping to do some things with some really cool, use some surprising new technology to recreate the interiors of it, recreate the exteriors full scale. There's some neat things we're going to do, that tie using technology that we use for like TV series like The Mandalorian and that sort of thing, where we're going to apply it to this. And so we're going to be having some visual effects in it and some, so it should be a really, really fun project when it all comes together. And so it's just going to kind of follow me around as I go and, discover and learn more about this thing and why people love it and why they're obsessed with it and how it's impacted our culture.
And there's so much to it. So it's really going to be an exciting time. And it's coinciding with the 50th anniversary of the series as well, too, which is very exciting.
Yep. Absolutely. So
I'm seeing some comments coming through. I just want to share. Scott Anderson Case is out there. Scott, thanks for joining. He said, so excited for this project. Space 1999 inspired me to join the film industry, and ultimately Martin Landau flew one of my model Eagles while we made his last film.
Very cool. That's cool.
Want to welcome Gwen. I see Gwen's out there. Gwen, thanks for joining. She's my friend from work. She's joining. She's saying hi, Roy, Ross, and Jeffrey. Just put that out there. And Sue also commented again, and she said, that's so cool that the Eagle is much more science-based and could exist in reality.
Yeah. That's, another thing that I want to explore in this documentary too is, there's some aspects of it that push it. I mean, it really, might not really work, in certain ways, right? But it's closer than the Millennium Falcon or something, right? Way closer to reality. One of the things Brian and I are talking about is like maybe doing a pass on this where we design a real one. Like, what would it look like if you said, all right, how would you have enough capacity for the fuel? How would you have enough? What would it run on? How would it, what if you really did this? What would it look like? I think that could be very interesting. And so there's an aerospace engineer that I work with. He's an advisor on a couple of my film projects, Aldo Spadani, and he's formerly with Northrop Grumman and he's worked with NASA quite a bit. And he actually designed the planes in the movie Stealth. He's a really cool designer. And he's come on board to help me realize the real Eagle, that Brian will help us visualize. And I want to do visual effects of that too. So I think that could be fun. So, and also I want to add that we plan on having a website with this. And on that website, we want the overflow from the documentary stuff that's not going to end up on the screen. So all kinds of clips and interviews and behind the scenes stuff that all live there. So you can go see that. And I'm also planning to have a section of that that's really driven by the fans, where the fans can share their stories and share their photos and share their they can reminisce and interconnect. So we're working on that as well. So it's a whole big project we're trying to create around this.
So this is going to be starting in regards to the website fairly in a short amount of time then, right? In regards to...
Yeah. Our plan is to, we want to launch this no later than March.
Okay.
Yeah, so March. We're in the design phase on it right now, and so we're hoping to have something up and running by mid to late March on that. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to interject too, because I know that you had posted this on your social media page just the other day, and definitely want to put that up there that you have Nick Tate involved in this.
Yes. We had a wonderful interaction that you facilitated, which was awesome, and I just thought, well, that was what we talked to him about 2 hours, and it was just a wonderful conversation. And what came out of it that was the most interesting aspect for me was when Nick said, I wasn't a sci-fi fan when I took the role, but I was interested in the space program. Right. And that to me really, right. And then that aligned with what we're talking about here, in a lot of ways. And then for him, I was when I was telling him about the impact it had on me. Like Alan Carter, his character, he flew the Eagle, right? So in a way, he was like the surrogate for all of us because he was doing the thing that we want to grow up to do. So when I played Alan Carter way more as a child than I did Captain Kirk, right? I mean, he was, Alan Carter was that was one of my heroes, man.
Oh yeah. Oh
yeah.
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 It's funny because I actually have recollections of and not even in the home that I grew up with and my parents, like, in the last, I mean, they've been there for like over 46 years, but when the show first came on and I was probably like 9 years old, I remember being with a friend and we're like sitting in the living room, on the living room floor, and pretending like we're in the cockpit and, like flying the Eagle.
Yep.
And, because like you said, Alan Carter was so cool. I mean, he was the guy. I mean, in regards to that.
Yeah.
No, I want to say Warren was, very happy to be a part of that. And he's actually commenting too in regards to, being on, with you and myself and, with Nick. It was a special moment because you had not, met him before in that capacity. So it was great just to see, how you were feeling in regards to that, because it shined on your face. And, we've had those moments, in regards to that. So it's a childhood hero. And Nick is a great guy. And he's
it's interesting. Someone in social media commented, they said, sometimes the getting to meet your hero thing doesn't always go very well. I had some interesting experience, and I'm not going to say any names, but where you were like, oh, that actor's so cool. And then you meet them, you're like, wow.
Yeah.
It's like, that was not what I thought, and everything.
Right.
And Nick was fantastic. It was absolutely fantastic. And I really liked, he really dug what we want to do. And that was the part that was so exciting for me too, was to have the positive feedback from him about the vision for the documentary and the plan. So that was great.
No, it's an exciting time, and it's great that everything is coming together with us. So we really appreciate you being on to talk about this and to share the information.
Yeah.
But in regards to that, and also Gordon is out there and he's saying hello as well. So he just said Nick is awesome and a storyteller.
Yes, he is. Yes, he is.
And Warren commented and said, never forget the day Nick said, I had a plum. Oh, geez. But in regards to your other projects that are coming up, we'd love to hear about those as well, too.
Sure. Ross, I'd love to, you have any questions or anything you want to talk about too along the way?
No, I mean, you're our guest. I'm listening.
Okay.
I'll interject.
Okay. Great.
I'll have my time later.
Yeah, I would say, let's see. So I've got kind of three main projects that I'm working on aside from the Eagle documentary.
Okay.
The number one that's functioning and actually moving ahead right now is something called Parallel Man, which is based on a graphic novel and animated like short that we did a few years back. And it actually it was cool because the short starred John Cho, as you had there, and it had the voice of John Cho, voice of Ming-Na Wen, voice of Lance Reddick, and it's a story of a kind of a totalitarian regime. Like, imagine this version of the U.S. where when they were doing the high energy physics experiments that created the atom bomb, if they instead created the ability to travel between universes. And so that version of the United States goes on, and they become corrupt and more powerful, and they start to actually they become this thing called the ascendancy that starts to control and dominate other countries, and other versions of the Earth. Actually, it's bigger than that. But I guess they start off by kind of taking over the Americas and other universes and everything. But there's a rebellion against it, and there's a super soldier named Nick Morgan. That's what John Cho did, the voice of that character. And it was a cool project. It was probably the hardest I've ever worked on an IP. It was really, really fun. Very futuristic design, really cool tech. It's as close to fantasy as I've ever gotten with a story. But it deals with all kinds of parallel dimensions and realities. But the thing that's different from ours is Parallel Man. We try to keep the science reasonable and rooted. So in other words, if they go to another version of the Earth, it's something that's scientifically plausible And so then we start dealing with the issues around that as you travel to that world. So what would a world be like where the dinosaurs were never wiped out? That, let's say, that asteroid missed, right? And they continue to evolve. What would that world be like? What would it be like if you had the Earth never fully coalesced, and it was this, horrible, hellish place with all these meteors coming down, all this kind of these different worlds. But you also have these worlds that are kind of mediocre, that are just kind of similar to ours. And in the story, their next target that they're taking over is our Earth. And Nick ends up teaming up with his doppelganger from our universe. So he's this cool James Bond guy in their universe, but here he's a gamer who plays a lot of video games and stuff. And he just kind of hangs out. And so those two guys are teamed up, and they go out and they have to save the universe, which is pretty cool. It's a cool story. So anyway, I'm doing an animated version of that, a feature film, and we're working with Polygon Pictures. They're our partner out of Japan, and Polygon, they're just celebrating their 40th anniversary this year, and they've done things like Star Wars Rebels, and they did Tron Uprising. They're a really they did a segment in the Love, Death, and Robots for Netflix the previous season. They're an amazing animation company. They're my dream partner for this, and we're developing a film that I'm planning to direct, and we should be making that within the next. I think it'll probably be about 2 years of work. Animation takes a while, so we're working on that one. So yeah, and we'll be making big announcements about that soon.
Sue is commenting, and she's asking, and she said, Roy, can you please? Trying to get the comment to come up here. Roy, can you please ask Jeffrey, how can we get a copy of the graphic trade for the compiled series on Parallel Man? It's not available on Amazon or is on the website. Is this something that is available?
Here's the thing. There is a website version. There's parallelman.com. If you go to parallelman.com, you can actually see there's a section there where the entire graphic novel's there. You can basically read it there and everything. We are talking about republishing it, but honestly, the movie is going to be different than the original graphic novel. We're tweaking it and changing it. It's like, taking a 7-issue comic book series that became a graphic novel and then turning that into a 2-hour movie. That's a pretty big change. So we're going to have a different version of this thing and everything. So I don't know if we're going to be republishing it anytime soon, but let her know that I'm very happy to send her a PDF of it if she doesn't find it on the website too. So I can share it that way. I'm happy to share it. So
yeah. That's wonderful.
Very proud of it. Yeah.
I'm sure she'll appreciate that. So
yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And she also asked too, and I'm in regards to if there was a Blu-ray version of the Parallel Man, the short, or is it only digital?
It's only digital. Yeah, we made it. I think I had a couple of Blu-ray versions that I made just for ourselves as our team, but right now it only exists as a digital thing. It's on YouTube, and it came out last year. We finally got it distributed there last year via Dust, their platform, and it's had over
really well too.
Yeah, it's done pretty well. So it's just really cool. So yeah. So, but look, and then Sue, there's a lot more Parallel Man coming. So yes, you can have a PDF copy of Parallel Man. We'll get it to you. Absolutely.
Awesome. Thanks for doing that, Jeffrey.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah.
David Frenzer is joining us, and he said good evening. So welcome, David. Thanks for joining us tonight. Now, another project that you have coming up that's in the works is Oceanus.
Yes. So, I'm not entirely. Let's see. So the short, we made a short film of that. It's the half-hour version of that, and a graphic novel of it back in 2015. And it took us a number of years to get it out into the marketplace. And but it's an underwater story. It's about an underwater city and a group of explorers and adventurers who live down there in the middle of the 21st century. And I'm in the process right now of I've got some very serious interest from a large film studio in taking it and making it into a film franchise. So we'll see what happens with that. That's one possibility. Another possibility is that we may go ahead and do a reimagined version of the short and just make a feature film of it ourselves, also. So we're still weighing the options out on it. But the good news is in the last 9 months, we've had millions and millions of people watch it finally. And I've had really, really good feedback. So it's like on Dust, it's the number 2 most popular thing out of over 900 movies that they have on there, which was really a huge honor, which is great. So very cool. So and it was a labor of love. It's so in a way, for me, it's kind of like an homage to, I very much like Star Trek the Motion Picture and 2001: A Space Odyssey and stuff like that. And I was kind of doing those underwater, that kind of vibe underwater. I think that the new versions will have a little bit more action and move a little faster, but I'm still not going to, another movie I like a lot is James Cameron's The Abyss. That's my favorite movie he's ever made. And I think Oceanus is going to have a lot of that vibe, Hunt for Red October, those sorts of things, some of that pre-1990 and earlier kind of sci-fi vibe. So yeah.
David commented. He said he was hoping for more. He really and he said he really loved it. So
well, thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, there will be more. We're gonna. The problem is, I could do a whole podcast about Hollywood, and the challenges of getting things made. The problem, the thing is that my team, we financed that project. And so we made it, we decided to do it, we cast it, we got the thing, and made it. The thing, and when we finished it, we were really excited and very proud of what we created. And we thought, why don't we just take this and make it into a full movie? And what we didn't understand was, all these issues around who's in your cast and having big names and, well, yeah, and then, and I don't know. It's like I said, I could go on and on. It's
Sure.
a real challenge, and it's been very, very frustrating and very emotional to have created something that we love so much, and knowing that it actually had value, but not being able to get it out there. And thank goodness Dust put it out finally for us. And like I said, the feedback's been phenomenal. So I think we can finally take that and actually have the fodder we need to prove, like, hey, we knew this was good. Let us do something more. With this, and like I said, if I can't get the studio system to do what I want with it, I'm going to just figure out a way to just make it myself and just get it done. So
see, that's what's wonderful about the power of social media, having the platform to be able to distribute that. And it kind of ties in what we were talking about earlier, how being able to do something like that, where maybe 20, 30 years ago, it didn't exist. And the fact that you can get the information out there and the movie out there and it's circulated, and to see the type of results it got.
Well, that's the good news, is that, like I said, we now have info. We can, it's not just us saying it, right? Yeah. The other thing that's really hard. So we had this underwater project that's this futuristic underwater thing. And the truth is, a lot of the Hollywood studios are very, very, there's a reason why we're only seeing reboots and remakes. And or it had to projects have to have proven themselves on some other platform for them to take a risk on it. They don't want to spend the money, unless this was a book that did really well. Okay, we can do that. Oh, this was a TV show 40 years ago. Okay, we can do that, right? It's like that's the mindset. So you come in with something brand new, and I ran into this with both Parallel Man and Oceanus, where the studios were really reticent. I think they saw that there was some talent and capability there, but they were like Parallel Man, for example. I met with studio execs who said things like, well, is this like Rick and Morty? I'm like, no. and then it was like, oh, okay, well, is it like Archer? I'm like, no. So it was very much like, does it fit in this bucket? And if it doesn't fit in this bucket, we're not going to take a risk on it, So but that's okay, because we're still here, and we're getting it done, and it's happening. So that's the
the important thing.
Yeah, that's the important thing. So yeah.
I like the pace of Oceanus, and I don't want you to soup it up too much if you can help it.
No, I'm not going to. Well, here's the thing. I appreciate that. I take that as a huge compliment, simply because I think so much stuff nowadays goes too fast in a way. Yeah. Right? There these movies, I watch them, I'm like, I don't even know what happened. Like, I'll see these edits are going so fast. I'm like, wait, what just happened? What did I just see?
Right.
Or it feels so computer generated that I'm like, well, this feels like I'm actually watching a video game cutscene where they put people in it, like real people. It just doesn't feel real to me. And one of the things I was trying to do with that film was give it much more of a, I'd call it a 70s, 80s pace, pace to it, So, but I think there's ways to do it where it's more like more stuff happens, but it's not cut faster. Does that make sense? Right. It's not editing super fast, but it's more like, sure. The adventure is more propulsive. I think that's where we're going to go. Okay. Yeah. So you'll like it.
I also like the fact that you took time to, even in that short format, to kind of spend time with the characters and have real character interactions.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I mean, at the end of the day, that's another part of this for me. It's like you can sit here having movies or stories about all the technology you want. It doesn't matter if you don't have people in the actual narrative that you care about, or that you're rooting for, or that you want to hate, or all those things, right? You have to have human beings there that matter, and that's what's going to drive it. And so I think that at the end of the day, that's kind of the number one aspect that I'm trying to shoot for with any of the stories we're telling, is that you care about the people and you're bought into their story or their struggle.
Yeah, you have to have that buy-in, because if you don't, the connection's not there. It's lost and
not there. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things. Like Ross, it's like when you have a film that goes too fast, there's no room to care about them, right? There's no.
I miss all those quiet scenes that we had in the 70s. In your even in your blockbusters, they would always have scenes like in Jaws with the three guys on the boat, where you can actually get the care about the
absolutely
moment,
and the actors could actually act, right? I mean, it's like you could actually, right? It's like, hey, we're just going to have the camera here, and we're going to, there's a recent movie, this film called Tar, that starred Cate Blanchett. And it was interesting because that is a film where there are moments. Did you see that? Did you happen to see it?
I haven't seen it yet, but I will.
There are scenes in that film where the camera just rolls for 5 or 6 minutes, and the actors are they're just on for 5 or 6 minutes, and there's literally no edits in the scene. It's really quite amazing to see that. And I started realizing, I was like, this feels like movies used to be a long time ago, where the actors actually had to carry it. They had to carry it with their performance and their expressions and their depth. Nowadays stuff's moving so fast, it cuts so fast. You can have people they can't even act, and you can make it seem like they can, because you're cutting 5 different camera angles together and all this, and then you're mixing it all. It's that sort of thing. So I think it's interesting. I do want to create content that will work for a broad audience, and I think that's important. But I also believe that I think that audience is smarter than Hollywood gives them credit for being. That's my point. And so that's why I want to challenge, the status quo a little bit. The other movie I'm working on, Persephone, I think it's extremely character driven, and it's very much about it's about a journey to the nearest star and to an Earth-like planet there, and about a colony that's being potentially set up on that planet. And then the people when they arrive, they discover that there's something there that they didn't expect. So so there's the poster for it there. Yeah. So that's a film that I'm working with the producer of Lord of the Rings on that. And we currently have Ming-Na cast in the lead, and Ming-Na Wen and Isai Morales is part of the cast, and Brianna Hildebrand from the Deadpool films and stuff. So that's kind of our biggest movie that we're developing right now. So our hope is that we're going to be in production on that before the end of this year. So, but that was one where we were really on a good track with it. Then the pandemic hit, and we've been developing that project for a while, and the industry shifting and the pandemic and everything has really kind of kept it in what I call the hamster wheel, I think people also call it development hell, but we're making progress. We're going to get it done. There's tons of good stuff happening with it. And Kevin Anderson, the author who did, he's worked on a lot of the Dune books and the Dune series, and Kevin and I co-wrote Persephone novel also that'll be available later this year. So, yeah.
Excellent. A lot of exciting stuff.
Yeah. So
you've got the filmmaking, you're working on the graphic novels, the novel. You're obviously a very good draftsman. I mean, from what I've seen on the there was a promotional video, you were really doing the production design for the films, which it looked very like Ralph McQuarrie-esque. I mean, you have real talent for because I was reading your biography and there's so many parallels, and it's like I used to sit for countless hours with the Star Wars soundtrack drawing things. I never got to your level. I mean, that's a natural talent to be able to draw like that.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. Well, I spent a lot of years tinkering with drawing spaceships and things. And, actually what I did originally is I just kind of started, I got those books and I started trying to copy what was in the books. And so I started trying to figure out like, what is the technique they used? And I learned how to use the rapidograph pens and markers and all these things. And I was like, okay, how did they do that? But honestly, I want to shout out to, I work with amazing groups of some of the artists that I work with. I'm very lucky to be surrounded by some really talented artists also who I'm work with as an art director, but then they take it and run with it and do really amazing stuff. I mean, we're working with this group out of the UK called Machinarium. They're based out of Pinewood Studios, and they build the sets and props for things like the Star Wars series and some Marvel films and stuff. And they've already started building stuff for Persephone, which is really cool. So I'm lucky to have access to people like that as well. So it's very cool. So.
But you have the mind. It's funny because you can have, like you say, there's the kids that played with the action figures and were interested in the lightsabers, and then you have the kids who look at the film and try to figure out like how's it work.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? It's like how does that happen? And it's the same thing with the drawing. It's like you can sit there and you can draw, the ship, but then you're figuring out how what the shading and how you would create a three-dimensional look to it, and what did Ralph McQuarrie do to
and I think beyond all that, the most important part for me has been trying to figure out a business infrastructure and a business approach to be able to really encompass all of it so I could actually maintain and go get it done. And that I spend probably of my career, I spent probably 80% of my time just trying to finance things and work with investors and keep things moving and stuff like that. That's the part that's the hardest. That's the hardest part of this.
Well, it's the most impressive part too, that you're able to take your dreams and to kind of push it to that level where you can get them off the ground like that.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Well, your drawings and your sketches are incredible, Jeffrey. I mean, in fact, if you're okay with it, some of that I'd love to share on the show's page, just so folks can take a look at that. If you're okay
sure, with that. That's fine. We can talk about it. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, happy to do that. So, well, I mean, I guess the key here with all this thing is, there's a journey here that we're trying to take, and I'm a fan just like you guys, right? And I know how much this can impact people and how it can be a positive aspect of our culture if done correctly, and that's very much part of what I'm trying to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Seeing a lot of positive comments coming through. Sue wanted me to ask you. She's saying, Roy, could you please ask Jeffrey if he has seen the extended version of The Abyss with the extra 31 minutes? It really fits into some of the gasps in the movie that was released in the theaters and makes it a better film, in my opinion.
I couldn't agree more. And even more than that, I would suggest, if you haven't read it, Sue, you should read the novelization of The Abyss. It is one of the best books I've ever read, by Orson Scott Card, who did Ender's Game. He wrote the novel of it. And it goes so far into the backstories of the characters and the whole circumstance and everything. It's brilliant. So yes, but I have seen I've seen the special edition of The Abyss, and I also recommend that book. And the other piece of good news is that The Abyss is supposed to be finally coming out on Blu-ray, that special edition, somewhere within the next few months. So it's supposed to be released finally. So that'll be pretty exciting. So
very cool.
Yeah.
Gordon just made two comments. He said the first one was they just need to select you as the next big thing. And then he also said, what about getting on one of the streamer channels and get a contract with the Avenue?
Well, let's see. I guess the thing is this, we're working on it. I think here's the thing. The challenge I have is this. If we do it, I want to maintain the integrity of what we're doing.
Right.
Does that make sense? So, that said, I think the marketplace is more open than ever to people like me if I can get to the right partners. right, and everything. So, because what I don't want to have is where someone takes a good idea like Oceanus and says, this is really cool. Let's put sea monsters in it.
Yeah.
Right. That's what I'm trying to avoid, or have it get dumbed down and turned into some, I'd almost rather not do it than see
You're
it.
trying to keep the integrity of your project and make sure it stays real to what your vision is.
But I think that this year is going to be the year that we hit critical mass with this and we finally break through. I think the Polygon deal is a big deal. I think the documentary is going to be a really big deal for us. And I'm getting ready to go to Berlin to promote Persephone to a bunch of buyers and financiers, which I think is going to be really exciting. So yeah, I think we're on the verge. We're close. We're really close. So.
Well, I think the documentary, and Gordon even commented, he made that comment, that the documentary is going to be very significant, and I really feel so too, especially, I mean, since you have the backing in regards to that, and it's something that's really going to be coming about, and I think once that vision is seen, and it's going to open the doors for the other projects just to follow suit. So
I agree. I agree. Well, the other thing is, I mean, the more that people like yourselves can spread the word that there's someone like me out here, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we can make this happen. We don't even, if enough of us come together and figure this out, we can do it. That's my point, right? It's like, and the studio system, there've been directors, a lot of these people. If you look at George Lucas, for example, a lot of people, when he convinced a studio head, Alan Ladd Jr., to finance Star Wars, right? People thought Star Wars was going to be garbage. They didn't. Yeah. And so he said, all right, fine. How about this? I'll take all the merchandise rights. And they were like, sure, go ahead. Nothing's going to happen with this. And look what happened, right? And, but in a lot of ways, George Lucas is an independent filmmaker, right? Outside of the system in a lot of ways. And I think that's more of where I'm trying to come at this, because I want to keep the quality of what we're trying to do. So we'll get there. Yeah, we'll get there. Yeah. So.
One last comment that just came through, and it was from Sue again, and she said, "Where could you please confirm the novelization of The Abyss was written by Orson Scott Card?"
That's correct. It was. Okay. Yes, it was. Yep.
Now, at the risk of knocking things off in another direction, have we covered what we're talking about right here? Is this? Have you said everything you wanted to say about this portion of the conversation?
Yeah, absolutely.
May I ask you? Because again, I was looking at your biography. Could you tell us about your parents? Because they sound like really extraordinary people. But I saw some parallels with my own childhood, and I'd like to hear like how you got encouraged and how you latched on to some of these things.
Well, I think so. A couple things. Number one, I was I've had an interesting journey there. So. I actually was adopted. I was as a very small child. Now my adoptive parents, I want to add, are African American. So I wasn't like, right. So but I think people hear that story like, oh, it's like, but no, and my father, who was he actually is one of the first Black engineers in the state of Arizona. He worked for General Electric actually. And he and my mother, they met. They were from Southern Illinois, and they met. And my father, he was involved with electrical engineering. He ended up working some on parts of the spacesuits, actually, some of the valves and solenoids that work inside the NASA spacesuits back for the program, which I think is really cool. And my mother actually was a library clerk. That's what she did. So she was, so between the two of them, when I was little, my dad brought home, let's see. So that when they adopted me, I was only a week old. And so as a matter of fact, they told me about it when I was about 4, and I would have just thought they were, I kind of even looked like them. So I didn't think anything of it, but my mother wasn't able to have children. So my parents were like, we want to give to the world. And so how can we help somebody else? So they decided to adopt me and my sister, and they got us both as infants, and which was really, pretty cool. I think very generous of them. And the reason why I'm saying this is because it was, I think it's part of what made them special people, that they chose to do this, because they could have said, well, we don't have children, but we can make money. So we're just going to, do our own thing. Right. But they said, we want to actually contribute to the world, and we want to actually help raise good kids and raise people who can go and become something. So my dad used to bring home models. Sometimes he brought home a model of the X-15, a rocket plane, and he and I would put things like that together. And then while we're putting it together, I'm this little kid, and he's telling me about it, and he's telling me about the pilots, and he's telling me about test pilots, and so he would talk about these things. And sometimes I think about, like, how did he know all this, especially in this sort of like pre-internet, right? And I think about how they had to read things or talk to people and learn this stuff, and they knew tons of things, right? And it was really quite amazing to me that he knew all this. He brought home a poster of the space shuttle for me 10 years before it launched.
Wow.
Yeah. So I had this poster, this thing, and I remember going to school showing this to my friends. They're like, "What is that?" They're like, "There's this like rocket thing with wings." I'm like, "Yeah, I know. Isn't it really cool?" So I had this poster of the space shuttle on my wall when it was just in concept art phase. That he because he worked for this company, Garrett Aircraft, and they would get access to some of this stuff. So he would bring it home and share it with me.
That had to be really cool.
That was super cool. And on my mother's side, what my mother did is she would take us to the library every week. So like once a week we would go to the library, and we would I was this kid who, like, I would just check out the same books over and over again because I thought they were so cool. And I would check out the space books, or I'd check out the National Geographic underwater books, or things like that. But the point was, that was part of our lives, was to go to the library. Mm-hmm. The other thing that my parents did that I thought was a really big deal is, being in Arizona, there was a lot of Frank Lloyd Wright. He was based out there at the time, and there was a lot of architecture, Frank Lloyd Wright stuff. My dad would take me around and show me Frank Lloyd Wright buildings and talk about futuristic engineering and design and architecture and stuff like that. So we would do that. And then there's an observatory in southern Arizona, a solar observatory, Kitt Peak. And there's actually a general observatory, but there's also there's a telescope that was designed specifically to look at the sun. And my parents brought me to that, and they showed me that, which was really cool. And so I was a little kid. So I guess the point is, I think if people realize, one of the things that I think is really tragic right now is that I see all these parents just kind of sitting around and they're on their phone, and then their kids are they're not talking to their kids, or there's a whole family and everybody's on their phone, everything. And I'm thinking about how much, when I was a little kid, but my dad would ask me questions and challenge me. He would ask me, like, what do you think of this? Or what if this happened? What if this plus this, what would you get? We would talk about the world and talk about these things. So I think that they inspired me to think and reason, right? And they also told me that I had the ability to be creative, and I had the ability to succeed, and so it was really important. And I think also, it's interesting because I'm not somebody who spends a lot of time talking about race, but just as a moment, as an aside on it, it was, my father, he was a black man who learned how he put himself through school, got himself into engineering, and then he fought his way into corporate America at a time when it was right dead in the middle of the civil rights movement. You could imagine, right? So a lot of the stuff he faced, I mean, he really did face actual discrimination to get to be where he was. I know a lot of people talk about how there's all this stuff going on nowadays, and I'm not saying that there aren't aspects of racism in our current society, but I think back then it was like there were actual laws that were in the way. There were actual, when my parents bought their first house in Arizona, it was in the deed that it couldn't be sold to them, literally, because of that kind of thing. But the reason why I'm bringing this up is because my parents, they overcame those things, and they taught us that we could do the same, right? So for me, I always felt like nothing was going to get in my way. You know what I mean? I've never allowed race or economics or anything to stop me from succeeding, because that's what I was taught. That's what I saw. That's what was modeled for me. So you asked the question, so I thought I'd answer it.
No, I'm glad you did. And also I saw that you were some of your interests when you were younger, you were into gardening and painting, and you were a reflective kid. You thought about things. It wasn't just this constant stimulation. You
no, not at all.
Not shoot over stuff.
No. It's funny because I don't tell myself this is the story now, but when I was a kid, I went through a fair amount of bullying for being, it was bullying for being smart. You get bullied for being different. You get bullied for, I got some bullying for race because I was in Arizona and we were in a suburb of Phoenix, and my sister and I were like the only kids of color pretty much in a school of like 700 kids. So that was a pretty big challenge when it was like the early 1970s. That was a big deal. And, and I think to some degree, sci-fi represented to me a better future. So I felt like the present, some of the strife I was facing in the present, I was able to kind of come home from school and those fights and those problems, and I would go, yeah, but you know what? On the Enterprise, they got it worked out. In the 23rd century, they got it worked out. On Space 1999, they've got it worked out, and I'm going to grow up and still be part of that. So being able to reflect on those sorts of things and that sort of stuff, that was definitely motivating for me. And I certainly told a lot of stories, and I would write stories and I'd come up with ideas and things, and that was kind of in my own little world, and to some degree, what people are getting to see now originated as the world that was inside my head when I was a kid. So.
It's interesting that you say that, Jeffrey, because I've heard a lot of people say that, and different people that I've met over the years, whether it has been at fan conventions or it's been online, just in different social situations, how those shows have really made an impact on them as individuals, not only in regards to helping careers, and a lot of times James Doohan, he would be one of the first persons to say when he was being interviewed, how he did influence, like a lot of people wanted to become engineers just because of Scotty. And I, it's, you would hear it time and time again, or even with Alan Carter, Nick Tate. I mean, he's even said, a lot of, people have wanted to be pilots and
this stuff does have an impact. That's actually part of what I'm trying to say about why I want to keep the integrity of the stories that we want to tell. Right. And another thing I want to add is that I'm not planning to create a lot of content that, I would find objective. With raising my kids, I really was very selective about what I would let my children watch. And as a matter of fact, I actually let my kids watch I didn't let them watch a lot of TV, but when we did, I showed them stuff from when I was a kid. We would watch old stuff. And so for them, it's not, they didn't think the visual effects were lame or the stuff like I was literally talking to my son, who was 19 a couple nights ago. And he's like, yeah, I'm going to watch some UFO tonight. What I mean? Because and they don't mind the pace of that stuff. They actually really like that because they got it. And I guess my thing is I want to make content now that I would have felt okay showing to my children. Does that make, so I'm not planning to have a lot of violence and guns and, I think you can tell human action adventures with like what we did with Oceanus, for example. No guns in that, you can do this and tell great stories without it having to rely on violence as the motivating factor, for example. Not to say that there won't be violent moments or action moments in the stuff that I create, but my point is that, I want it to be much more about the people and the circumstance and the adventure, Yeah. So, yeah. I don't know if I answered your question, Ross. I hope I did.
No, I was just looking for, for you to talk a little bit about your background, because it was, you bothered to put it in the biography, and it was so beautifully laid out, and there's so much stuff that you got to. This not totally unrelated, because it's creative, but you did so many other things before you got into film, or parallel with that. Did you really work with Prince?
Oh yeah. I actually, it's funny. When I first moved to Minnesota, part of why I moved to Minnesota is because I wanted to be around the whole Minneapolis music scene. And I was back then it was funny because I looked very different. I had long hair, and I looked like a Prince kind of guy back then. I used to DJ at clubs, and I did, and I'm a musician. And I almost went the path of being a musician, but I made the decision that I thought, being an entrepreneur and in film was much more stable and much more had longevity to it. And I thought it was a better expression for myself, long term. But within a couple of years, I moved to Minnesota in 1988, and within I think a year and a half, I was doing some work out at Paisley Park. I ended up being like, I did choreography, dance choreography in a couple of Prince videos. And I was in a couple of Prince videos as an extra sort of guy, you know, and everything. So if you, you know, I'm not going to say which videos, but you could see me in there. Had a couple of them in the background. But what was interesting is I ended up more talking to Prince about his goals in terms of marketing and that sort of thing. So as I launched my business, they didn't even remember me when I came back a few years later. You know, I looked more like this, and I was the guy who was going to build his new website, or I was going to do promotional videos for him. He had a dance company, and I directed a bunch of commercials for his dance company and stuff like that. So it was interesting. It was really cool. Like, you know, I had a couple moments in my career early on that told me I was on the right path. One day, Prince called me at my house. That was one of the biggest moments of my. It was so cool because that was back when he wasn't Prince. He was known as the artist because
this is the artist.
So I got this phone call. I pick up the phone rings and they go, yes, is this Jeffrey? I'm like, yeah. And they go, please hold for the artist. Artist, you know, right? and then I hear this like subtle, deep, sexy voice says, Jeffrey. You know, and it's Prince, and then he and I ended up having this conversation about this project and everything. So that was really, really cool. That was
that's pretty awesome.
Having Prince call me at my house. So yeah. So yeah.
Martin actually posed a question to Jeffrey. He said, Jeffrey, if you could have any composer do any of your film endeavors, who would you choose?
Well, so I work with someone who is kind of my go-to composer, is a guy named Jeff Rona, who actually did the soundtrack of the movie Oceanus for me. And if you want to listen to it, you should go online. I've had people, it's only a 30-minute film, but the soundtrack is so good, we actually released it. And I've had a lot of people tell me that it's one of the best soundtracks they've ever heard. So, which is pretty cool. I think Jeff is super, super talented. I am partial to working with him, but I'm a big fan of Bear McCreary, who did Battlestar Galactica and, you know, so many other things. I think the reboot of Battlestar Galactica, the music in that series is about as good as it gets. And he also does like Outlander and all these, you know, he's done tons and tons of stuff. So I'm a big Bear McCreary fan, but you know what? I'm going to go another way. You said, who could I get it'd probably be Jerry Goldsmith, because of I think what he did with like Star Trek, the motion picture, was legendary. It was phenomenal. And I still think that's like the best movie soundtrack of all time. So he's, you know, deceased at this point, so I'm not going to get to work with Jerry Goldsmith, but that would be a fantasy, would be to work with Jerry Goldsmith, you know, everything. But Jeff Rona's my Jerry Goldsmith now. So yeah. So.
Dan Rodriguez commented, he said, that's really cool that your parents had the background and were able to encourage you and fan the flames of your interests.
Yes. Thank you. I'm, you know, my father passed away in 2011 and I lost my mother in 2015, but I hope their legacy, I hope I'm doing justice to what they, you know, entrusted to me, you know, which I think is great. So it's a big deal. You know, I think all parents should, I don't know if people really realize the responsibility you have by having children and how much you can actually influence them in ways that you don't have a clue how much you're influencing your children, you know, how much you could influence your children in a lot of ways, you know. So I think it's a big deal. So thank you for saying that, Daniel. Appreciate that.
Just want to check. Ross, did you have any other questions that you wanted to pose to Jeffrey?
Oh, I mean, you know, he's got so much stuff we can talk about. I mean, I don't know where you guys want to go with this because we're already at an hour and a half into it. And I want to make sure you hit what you need to talk about.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah. Brennan, welcome to the show. And I didn't get a chance to say hi to you earlier. Brennan commented and said, Bear McCreary did a live concert of Battlestar Galactica music, and I think it's still on YouTube. It's really terrific. Definitely check it out if you haven't already.
Brennan, I not only have checked it out, but he actually released it. I can't remember the name of it. There's it's not So Say We. There's that soundtrack is actually that is recorded, and I actually you can download it. So it's awesome. Yeah, no, that's a really cool album. It's good stuff.
Sue's getting a little personal. She asked you though. She's saying, "What was your father's name who worked at GE?" And she said, "We just had a class on Black culture at work, and we're curious to hear what your dad's name was."
my father's name is Willie Morris, Willie B. Morris, and Willie. He worked with General Electric in the early 1960s, and then he went on to Garrett Aircraft, and then I think when he retired, he worked with the Department of the Navy. So yeah, so yep.
And Gordon has a question for you. What is your story on how you got involved with Space 1999?
The very first time I think I saw a commercial. So I must have been about 8 years old, and there was a commercial that they used to have these. You remember back then there were only like 3 TV networks, right? You had ABC, NBC, CBS, and or PBS, right? And you had those 4, and the NBC affiliate, the NBC affiliate in Phoenix, they had a preview of the fall TV programs. And there's, some guy, some 70s looking guy up there talking about, this fall, we've got these new shows and everything. But one of the shows we're most excited about is this new thing called Space 1999. I was like, what? I was like, what's that? And so then they showed a promo. And in the promo, they showed Eagles taking off and the rovers driving around and all this stuff. And I was like, whoa, what is that? I was like, oh, I got to watch that. I got really, really excited about it. And I used to be this like TV guide freak. So you get TV Guide and you look through it and you figure out like, what am I going to watch? And so I kept looking at TV Guide, waiting for when Space 1999 was going to come on. So, and I think it came on like 6 o'clock at 6 o'clock Saturday night in Phoenix. I can't remember channel 11 or so. I can't remember I think it's, anyway, on the NBC affiliate, it was syndicated, right? So they would put it on before primetime shows on Saturday night. And I remember watching it, and I was into it from the very first second of Breakaway. I was just really, really into it. I thought it was just super awesome. And I being a science person, I remember by the end of the episode when the moon got blasted out of orbit, I was kind of like, wait, what? I was sort of like, wait, I don't know if that would happen. But I was like, okay, I really like those Eagles though, and so then when they started going to other planets, like, it's kind of like Star Trek. I was like, I don't know how that would happen, but that's fine, and I just kind of went with it. But there were some episodes of that first season. I'm a first season guy. It's not that I guess what Bringers of Wonder or something I liked from the second season, but because it just was such a freaky episode. But I was a first season guy, and I love Victor Bergman. He's still one of my favorite characters of all time. I think he was the heart of that show, that character. Barry Morse did such a great job. And it's, one other thing is interesting to me is that I thought that what I like is that the ageism that we have nowadays in our culture didn't exist back then, right? So like I, as an 8-year-old kid, could look up to Barry Morse, this old balding Englishman, and I'm going, that I want to be that guy. That guy's super cool, right? That was something that I thought was really neat about the time, and everything. So. But I love the costumes and I like the design of the moon base and just, everything from the travel tubes. It was just so realized. Mm-hmm. It felt like that's a place. That's a real place. And I love the characters. I liked Commander Koenig more than Captain Kirk. I would talk to my friends. I kind of like this Space 1999 thing more than I like Star Trek. And my friends didn't get that. But I was like, it's so cool. And then I started showing it to them. We talk about it. So that's how I got into it.
Yeah,
probably 7, 8 years old, somewhere like that.
You're bringing back a lot of memories of all that because, as we all know, I'm pretty much, I love the show, loved it from the beginning. And your description too of those earlier promos, I remember Channel 11 out of New York City was running them because it was like a special event, and they kept showing that scene when the nuclear waste explodes, and I can effectively, Alan Carter, Alan Carter was saying, Alpha, can you hear me? And he's like, that explosion. And then they would be like, tune into Space 1999, premiering. And it was it was such a big event because they were trying to sell the show.
Yeah.
And here we are talking about it. And that was in
exactly. Yeah, we're still here.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yep.
Gordon commented, he was saying about Bringers of Wonder, when Koenig is saying grandma's wig, and he's piloting the Eagle and going crazy.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, though, he commented about Brian Johnson and Keith Wilson. They were both amazing. And
yeah, sadly, it was amazing. And I would definitely say that Moonbase Alpha and the design and all that stuff, it's a huge influence. Someday I'll show you guys some of the behind the scenes on Oceanus, but like, we realized and designed that world just as thoroughly. That underwater city is my Moonbase Alpha. So yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Well, those sketches are incredible. I mean, that you've done. I mean, just to look at it, it is so functional, and it feels real. It's like you were saying about the Moonbase when you were watching especially the first season. I mean, it really felt operational. It felt it was fast.
It was also big. It felt big. It felt big. It felt like it was like that set, the main mission. I had never seen anything that was so big, and it was like, this is awesome, Yeah.
Dennis Chevalier said, I used to watch it sitting in front of the TV playing with my Mattel Eagle, which connects to what you were saying about the memories of the Eagle and how we all connect with it on a certain level.
No, Dennis, I did the same thing. Yeah.
And Brennan saying 1999 seemed more realistic to me than Trek when I was a kid. It reminded me of 2001.
Absolutely, no question.
Gary's saying, gotta go, but thanks to Jeffrey for sharing his time and stories with us. This was a great show. See you, Roy and Ross. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Gary. Appreciate it.
But
cool.
Andrew Ray's joining us from Australia. Just so you know, just want to give a shout out to Andrew. He just tuned in, so he's out there. And
hey, Andrew, nice to see you. Yeah. So,
and one last comment, and then we'll wrap things down. Warren just said, when I had arguments with childhood friends, I always argued more about the realistic 1999 was over Trek, in particular the stun guns that actually stun someone as opposed to vaporizing them.
Yeah. Well, like I said, it just felt closer to us.
Yeah,
which was the thing. Yeah. So
folks, if you have any last minute questions that you'd like to share, please do so. I'm just going to share a couple of things, and then we actually have like some. I was worried earlier that we were going to get disrupted because we're having like windstorms around here too. So I'm glad our power did not cut. I was very fearful of that, Jeffrey. So
that's good.
We actually made it through, which is great.
No, I mean, we have a few more minutes. I can give a few more minutes if somebody has. I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has.
No. Okay. So I'm just going to Ross, if you can just let everybody know what you've got going on for this weekend. I'm just going to present that slide and just do a real quick shout out on that.
All right. All right. These are the two shows I've got on WWFM, the Classical Network. Picture Perfect's the movie music show. That's tomorrow night at 6. And this week we're going to Mars. So I've got some movies about the Red Planet, including selections from talking about Jerry Goldsmith, selections from Capricorn 1, Robinson Crusoe on Mars by Van Cleve. We've covered that on this show. Rocket Ship XM, music by Ferdi Grofé. That's the first outer space score to employ the theremin, and music from John Carter by Michael Giacchino. So Mars is our destination, whether by design, by accident, by conspiracy, or by unexplained means. This Saturday night at 6, we're going to Mars on Picture Perfect on WWFM.org. Sunday night on The Lost Chord, that's unusual and neglected classical music. The focus this week will be on Ida Rubinstein, who was a dancer. She danced the Dance of the Seven Veils in a production of Oscar Wilde's Salome, but she was known in classical music circles for having introduced Ravel's Bolero. She danced in Stravinsky's The Fairy's Kiss. We'll be hearing selections from Vincent Dandy, a piece called Ishtar, and a piece called Semiramis by Arthur Honegger. I'm sorry. And that program is Ida Danced All Night. Music written for Ida Rubinstein, or at any rate, she premiered it. And that is Sunday night on The Lost Chord at 10 o'clock at WWFM.org. If you can't listen at the times indicated, they will be posted there later as webcasts. And I'll tease them this weekend on my Facebook page. I'll write about the movie music show tomorrow morning. And Sunday morning, I'll tease Ida Danced All Night on The Lost Chord at Classic Ross Amico. Thanks.
No, thanks, Ross. And then lastly, folks, just want to remind everybody, next Friday, February 10th, we are going to be actually having another filmmaker, writer, and director, Patrick Reed Johnson. Patrick was scheduled to be on actually last Friday, but he was having some connectivity issues. So we're very happy that he's going to be joining us. And he actually is the filmmaker, and he wrote and directed 5/25/77, which is the coming of age film, and which of course refers to the date of the Star Wars release. So he's going to be joining us next Friday, and that will be at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I just wanted to remind everybody about that. And let me get back here. Okay, here we go. Yeah, and it's funny too. Everybody's saying about the wind howling in the Northeast. Everybody's got a lot of storms going on. So yeah, but if anybody has any other, Sue's actually asking one question, Jeffrey. She's asking, Roy, could you ask Jeffrey to say which of his movies they released Jeff Rona's soundtrack separately on?
Yes, we released it both for Oceanus and Parallel Man. Both have soundtracks that are out available on YouTube, on iTunes, and I think Spotify. I think they're everywhere. That both of them are everywhere. So you can look at Parallel Man does have a soundtrack also. It's out there.
Yeah. Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Yep.
So, but Jeffrey, I want to thank you for joining Ross and I. And
Sure.
No, it's been great. It's been great having you on. And this time Ross wasn't available the last time, so I'm glad he got to meet and talk with you as well.
Yeah,
It's been great.
Ross, really enjoyed speaking with you and appreciate your questions. It was great.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, like I said, I mean, you provide all the material for the questions. There's so much that we didn't even touch on tonight, but maybe another time.
Well, we've got plenty more to talk about. Let's get these projects moving. And Roy's a key element of this documentary, and you've been a fantastic resource and brain buddy on this thing, and really appreciate you working with me on it. So it's been great.
Thanks, Jeffrey. It's
and I want to say the same thing to Gordon and Warren and the others from the team. It's been great. So appreciate it.
We do too.
Yeah.
Well, until next time, folks, we'll take care, be safe, have a wonderful weekend. And as I always like to say, live long and prosper. Have a great night.
Thanks, everybody.